just a few housekeeping points before we get going from Jamie Smith.
Hi there, everyone. So welcome to this first webinar with Catchment Sensitive Farming Partnership and the Forestry Commission. Just a few things, as Philip has said. So just so you know, this webinar is being recorded. Everyone's microphones have been put onto mute. Also, everyone's cameras are turned off, just to make sure that everyone has the best possible experience. During the event, if you've got any questions at all, you can just post them in the chat window, which you can access by moving down to the bottom and then pressing the little speech bubble. And the presenters will pick up your questions throughout the presentation. So as I said, the webinar will be recorded. It will be posted onto the Catchment Sensitive Farming YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box, and then we'll pick them up as we go through. Philip is now going to cover the run-through of tonight and this webinar, and thanks again to everyone for joining us.
Hi everyone, I'm Philippa Mansfield. I'm in the Catchment Sensitive Farming National Team. I'm really pleased to welcome you today. So this is a joint presentation from Catchment Sensitive Farming, CSF, and the Forestry Commission. It's going to last just over an hour. We're just doing a bit of an introduction first, and then I'm going to hand over to Matthew Woodcock and Chris Waterfield from the Forestry Commission, who are going to talk about how to generate farm income from trees. And then over to Jeff Newman, who's a CSFO in Herefordshire and Gloucestershire, who's going to talk about some examples of planting orchards on his farm and some examples from a farmer he's been working with as well. We will pause for questions a couple of times after Matthew and Chris's talk, and then after Jeff's talk, so you'll have time to put your questions in the chat, and we'll answer them. We won't be unmuting everybody, I'm afraid, because otherwise it will be very noisy. How trees benefit your farm business, I think it's quite a crucial topic at the moment. Trees are being held up as the answer to a lot of environmental issues, not least climate change and net zero, but we need to make sure that we plant trees in the right place, and they need to work for your farm business as well, so that's really important to understand that. There are going to be lots of changes coming up in agriculture over the next few years, I'm sure you're all aware, and they'll bring new challenges but also new opportunities, and we're already starting to see changes in land values and that sort of thing. So a good opportunity to look at the options for tree planting now, and think about what you might be able to do on your farm. At the end of the presentation, we're going to ask you to fill in a survey, and we'll also provide you with a leaflet that's been produced, which will cover some of the topics that have been covered in the talks already. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Matthew Woodcock from the Forestry Commission.
Hopefully. All right, I'm Matthew Woodcock. I'm Partnerships and Expertise Manager for the Forestry Commission in South East England. I've been with the Commission for about 35 years and worked with a lot of farmers over those years. A lot to do with developing markets. So without further ado,
are you on mute, Matthew?
That might help.
Well done, Matthew.
So, good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Woodcock. I'm the Partnership and Expertise Manager with the Forestry Commission for South East England. I've been with the Commission for about 35 years, so hopefully we can give you a little bit of an introduction to how trees could help your farm business. So, as a general premise, the role of trees, as Philippa says, is sort of jumping up the agenda as almost the panacea to so many challenges. So if you see that slide there, leaves to root hairs, we've got every benefit from slowing flood flows, to cleaner water, to carbon storage, to timber and fuel, to shade, to soil stabilisation, to wildlife habitat, to health and well-being. So who would have thought that if you see green from your hospital bed, you actually get better, quicker and cleaner air? Excuse me, I think we've got someone who's not muted. Okay. So what we will try and do as we go through is show you where trees can fit into your farm business and give you some ideas. So many times over the years, trees have been often perceived as a nuisance on the farm. So they can be seen as a problem in the shade arable crops. They can be seen as lost grazing. They can be seen as a dumping ground. And that's where a whole load of poor corn was just thrown into a nice wood on the edge of the farm. Or they can be seen as a liability. And that's particularly true with the challenge of cholera or ash dieback on boundaries and things in England at the moment. But they're also a huge opportunity. So whereas historically it's very often that the trees and forests are seen at one extreme and the farming is seen at the other extreme, they're actually an integrated part of the landscape, an integrated opportunity in your farm business. So what we've got here is just an illustration which is available in the leaflet, which is available from Philippa & Co. And as opposed to just to highlight where trees might fit on the farm business. I'm not going to go into that in detail because we'll follow that through with slides from now on. So traditionally, trees produce wood, but obviously trees take a long time to grow. And an oak rotation can be 100 years or 300 years sometimes. So it's not producing an income very quickly from the mature oak timber, but from the thinnings from that timber, it can be producing a return within that 20 years. My colleagues will explain other opportunities to cover up to 20 years later. Douglas fir has the opportunity to grow to maturity in 50, 60 years, but increasingly we're seeing that grown on what we call a continuous cover regime on about 100 years. So you're getting a very substantial tree in 100 years, but in an established wood, you're taking trees out every year or so. Increasingly, we're seeing a lot of interest in what we call faster growing species. So a lot's been said over the years about short rotation coppice and what we call short rotation forestry of poplars and willows and eucalypt. There are other species being considered, but also how we think outside the box, how we think how they can knit into your business by delivering things closer, and I'll come to that shortly. So the markets for wood, they've really grown in the last few years. Now, over most of my career, I've seen the markets decline, but in the last 10 years, particularly in southern England, we've seen a growth in the markets. So we've seen quite a lot of investment go into relatively small-scale sawmills. This is a local estate-scale sawmill that's developed their local business, local markets, of adding value to their timber, and then going beyond the estate and talking to the neighbouring landowners, farmers and estates to talk about how they can use their wood and add value to that wood as well. We've also seen a huge increase in the value of pedigree. Now you might think, what on earth is that to do with timber? But the place a tree is grown can give it pedigree. So this is a company called English Woodlands Timber who specialise in marketing the timber. Literally, you go on their website, you pick the board you want, and you get that board. Literally, to show you how big that opportunity is, they've sold Arctic loads of timber to Hawaii. So, like any business, marketing is key. They've done particularly well at it. Similarly, beyond timber, the markets for wood as a renewable fuel have grown significantly in the last 10 years. And this is what I would call the equivalent to feed wheat, to the base market for quantity material, selling a commodity material. So we've seen 1 or 2 power stations around the country be commissioned in the last 2 years that are completely fueled by wood. So this is Kent Renewable Energy at Sandwich, which takes 240,000 tonnes of relatively low quality broadleaf wood a year. But it means that there is always that market for lower quality wood. At a more local scale, what you might say is equivalent to the malting barley market is where you're adding value and you're selling a quality product to local users. So this is on Albury Estate in Surrey, where they season wood, produce quality wood chips and deliver it to local markets, like schools, hotels even, council buildings, big houses. And then there's the equivalent, what you might call, to the farm shop. Be the price maker rather than the price taker. So this is a farmer on the South Downs who put in his own wood fuel system and then realised that the school next door was looking for a renewable fuel source as well. So he's developed his supply chain where literally he supplies wood chip to that school's boiler by driving it about 100 yards in the telehandler corn bucket and supplying it directly to the school. So he's able to add value to the chips by selling the chips, by using his own wood, and he's developed the farm supply chain. He's bought a second-hand forwarding trailer so that he goes out and extracts the timber when the conditions are just right, just the same as you would with any other crop, to go out when the conditions are right. Now, I mention that because just like any field, farmland, whatever, the soil is actually key. So if we've got markets, we mustn't be tempted to go in when the conditions are wrong. Because when you go into a wood, when the conditions are wrong, you destroy the soil for decades. So the 2 upper photos show a situation where the harvesting operation was carried out when the conditions were very, very poor. The lower slide is a similar site 20 years on, and it's never fully recovered. The growth of the trees, the next generation of trees, is extremely poor. It'll probably take many decades before that site recovers. So please, when you've got the markets, do harvest when the time is right. If you get it wrong, it can be very embarrassing. It can cost a lot. And on some occasions, you can get prosecuted just the same as you would by adding silt into a watercourse in the normal way. But well-managed woods are highly attractive. They're resilient to disease. They allow you to do other things in the wood. They add value to the farm. They add value to the estate. So do think about what good, well-managed woods are. Now, those are the sort of traditional values you think of from farm woodlands and forestry as a whole. But then there are the wider benefits that they deliver to the farm business. Now, increasingly, shade is very important, particularly with stock. And these photos, 2 of them were taken in the last 2 years on the South Downs, where stock are actually sheltering from the very hot summers. And when you see the sheep that are just trying to cram under that small tree, you realise how valuable it is. Jamie, my slides have frozen.
Bear with me a second, Matthew.
All right, we've got it.
Great, carry on.
So there's also erosion control. So with with climate change, we get hotter summers, we get drier summers, but when we get a storm, we get a heavy rain. And erosion is something that is increasingly common. And by carefully placing trees and small areas of woodland in the right place, you can slow that flow before it gets to an erosive speed. There's also shooting, very traditional. I didn't realise that the shooting business in the country has increased to, I think it was 2 times from the last 20 years. So it's now much, much greater than when I was a kid. And well-sited woodlands can allow pheasants to be presented very, very well for high-quality shooting. There's a lot of interest growing in agroforestry, and Jeff's going to talk a lot more about that a little bit later. I've been very, very impressed with how poultry in particular respond to true free-range under woodlands. And it seems corny, but they feel like happy hens. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a very fast-growing species that some farmers are considering, which is Paulonia. And there the rotation's about 20 years to quite a sizable sawable tree too. But we mustn't forget recreation. And one of the things that's come out of COVID is that more people are staying at home. So they're looking for opportunities for recreation at home. And in a lot of the countryside, we've got fantastic landscapes. We've got a fantastic offer. We've got loads of history. We've got loads of things that we can show and introduce people who are interested in the local environment. So we've seen the big ticket expensive items like Go Ape, glamping, cycling. But what we've got in the bottom corner there is an illustration of where farmers can come together and landowners can come together and look at where they each fit into the network and pull together and see how their mutual offers can complement one another. And in 1 or 2 cases, we've seen some fantastic developments, such as Millet's Farm in Oxfordshire, where they've developed quite an offer where when people get to site, they try and keep them there for as long as possible and obviously spend more money. And here we've got the river valley of the Ock, which is virtually impossible to manage for arable in the modern day. Would have traditionally been used for grazing beef, probably. And they put it down to woodlands because it's another offer they can give when people come to visit the farm. In parallel to that, it also slows flood flows. Now, flooding, you've all probably heard how woodlands can help slow water. And to illustrate that photo there, the one in the centre, is the inshore lifeboat going up the main street in Uckfield in 2001. And that's what you get from a very, very flashy catchment. So we can do things within woods and in parts of farmland where we slow the flow in the streams by what's become known as the leaky woody dams. And there's lots of ways and lots of scales that can be done at. But also you can look at a landscape scale and look at where the stream runs across the farm and look at the opportunities to take land which is prone to flooding, which you might lose the crop on one year in 3 or so, and actually put it into woodland in a way that slows the flood flow and also generates an income from the woodland as well. We shouldn't forget water quality. We've been doing a lot of work with water companies on chalk aquifers, where nitrates have been put on that land for 40 years, is coming out the bottom. We will not be able to stop that coming out the bottom for a long, long time. But there's also a very quick way that nitrate flows across that kind of farmland after a heavy rain and goes through the equivalent of underground rivers and basically turns the water that's going or coming out the boreholes from the water companies from the equivalent of Evian to the equivalent of ginger beer. And the water companies are talking to farmers about how they can locate small areas of woodland in the right places to act as filters for that surface flowing water before it drops into those underground streams. And where one sites them on the farm, we've done a lot of work talking to farmers about where one could fit woodlands on the farm that delivers the water agenda, but more importantly fits within the farm business and the farm opportunities as well. So you're probably unlikely to get woodland in that upper slide, but when I happened to meet that farmer, he said, oh yeah, well, we've got an area over the right-hand side where we would consider it for various other reasons. And in pinch points down the valley in the bottom there are greater opportunities where you're already coping with shade. Air quality is another thing. That is a very large poultry unit. It could be a pig unit. The ammonia emissions from that unit are increasingly something which is of concern. And by planting trees around that, one can help filter out the ammonia flow in the air. But one of the key things is you don't have to do it all on your own. So we're seeing very strongly in the southeast, and I suspect around the country, the value of farm clusters, of farmers coming together and looking at their collective resource. So who's got buildings that are underutilised? Who's got staff that may be not fully occupied? Who's got, trailers and tractors that are a sunk cost that you can make better use of by tying them into another business as well? So by looking at opportunities at landscape scale, you also identify the markets of the landscape scale as well. So certainly, I'm sure you are, think about working together. But a lot of you will be asking, well, what are the grants? So Jamie, I seem to have drifted the screen off, have I? Or does it look reasonable?
We can still see the screen, okay, Matthew. We're on the grant for woodland creation.
Good stuff. So there are three key strings of grants. There's the part of countryside stewardship. There's the grant under the Woodland Carbon Fund, which the Forestry Commission administers directly. And then also there is a corridor alongside the high-speed 2 rail link, which goes out to 25 miles from that rail line, where High Speed 2 are sponsoring woodland creation as well. So the key thing to note about this is Countryside Stewardship and Woodland Carbon Fund both pay 80% of the standard costs of planting the woodland agreed with Brussels. Now, if you do the work yourself, the net cost may be covered by the grant completely. There is a maintenance payment for the first 10 years, £200 a year under Countryside Stewardship and one fixed payment after 5 years under Woodland Carbon Fund. During that time, you can still get basic payment scheme while it's here for that 10 years. The minimum areas under Countryside Stewardship are 3 hectares on the farm, minimum 1 hectare blocks, unless water is the key driver. And in that case, you can have blocks down to less than 0.25 of a hectare. You do need to register with the Rural Land Register for Countryside Stewardship, as you've been familiar with, but you don't have to register with that for the Woodland Carbon Code. And if you are willing to allow the public into the wood in the right place, near people, we can go up to 100% of that standard cost of the work and contribute to any capital costs of putting in signage, tracks, etc., etc. Now, one thing that helps a lot of people in the last few years is a new grant called the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. And this has helped people consider how they would fit the woodland into a particular location and how one would address any particular concerns about archaeology access landscape, that kind of thing. So this grant was available to blocks over 10 hectares in size. It has very recently been decreased so that it's available to anyone wanting to plant 5 hectares in one block. So that's certainly something that's worth talking to. And we would encourage you to talk to our woodland officers or our woodland creation officers if you're interested. Now, we talked earlier about the opportunity for funding in the early years of the growth of the woodland. And my colleague, I'll hand over to my colleague, Chris Waterfield, to explain that.
Thanks, Matthew. Is there any chance that you can reduce the screen size back down again? Because I can only see about a third of it.
I wouldn't do it if I knew.
Anyway, let's see. Oh, that's better. That's better. If you move on to the next slide for me, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. So, as Matthew said, the Woodland Carbon Guarantee is a new incentive. I say a new incentive. It's been out for approximately a year now. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But it will provide you with a guaranteed income of 30 years if you're fortunate enough to get an agreed contract with the Forestry Commission. Everything has to be validated and verified under the Woodland Carbon Code, and if you'd like to know more about that, there's a website with the web address there, which I'm sure will come out with the slide pack that you'll get after this event. Next slide, please, Matthew. The Woodland Carbon Guarantee sits amongst our Forestry Commission incentives. As Matthew's explained, there's a whole lot of grants available for helping with the capital cost of establishing a woodland and the initial maintenance period. What the Woodland Carbon Guarantee does is say, sign up to a standard, manage your woodland to that standard, and you can sell your the carbon that is being sequestrated, the carbon dioxide being sequestered into your woodland. You can sell to the government on the basis of us as a nation meeting our climate change objectives. You will be contributing towards that and selling it to the government for a long period of time, and that gets you an income from year 10 to year 35. Matthew, could you put the slide on, please? So, in England, we're quite fortunate. Some people would think so, some people wouldn't. But this Woodland Carbon Guarantee is available only in England, and it is to create long-term carbon sinks so that we can meet the net zero and the climate change targets. We have £50 million allocated towards this particular income stream. As I say, I'm very carefully picking my words because the next line says it's not a grant, it's an additional income stream. But those incomes will get you, will give you that contract across the next 35 years, whilst your trees are growing, whilst traditionally they are not providing you with any income from thinning. 35 years, by the way, exactly the amount of time that Matthew's worked for the Forestry Commission. So if he planted trees when he was when he just joined, he would have been receiving an income all the way through till now, and that's something to think about. It's somebody's life or somebody's working lifetime that this is providing an income for. It is available in addition to other grants, and as I said before, it's verified and validated under the Woodland Carbon Code. There are certain things that you need to do with the Woodland Carbon Code that allow you to make the greenhouse gas claims that you can with this, but only if you sign up to the Woodland Carbon Code. Could you put the slide on, please? We have had 3 auctions, and the process of getting into the Woodland Carbon Guarantee is via a reverse auction. So you put your best lowest price that you can sell carbon in for to the government, and we'll say whether that lowest price has met is below our reserve price and is acceptable to us. So in the first auction, we had a budget of £10 million. Actually, only £5 million of that was allocated, and 31 projects were entered, but only 18 of them were successful. For the second auction, same budget, we had 77 projects, and most of those 77 were for predominantly native woodlands. It so happened that most of the projects that actually got through and were successful were from an exotic species that Matthew's mentioned already, Paulownia, and it was able to provide a very low cost for us. But we had 1,500 new hectares of woodland being created under that budget. The third auction, which happened in October and November, had a similar size budget of £10 million, but we only allocated £5 million again, and there were approximate, and it was split between predominantly native and other species, and it was we got about half and half of species of both of those groups, and about another 600 hectares of woodland coming through. Lots of those woodlands being created on farms. Matthew, if you could put the slide forward one, please. Thanks. So actually, it's about entry into this woodland carbon market is all about price. There isn't particularly a market at the moment. It's one-to-one transactions. We are looking at building a platform that helps people get together to make a deal. But carbon will sell from anything from £7 to £20 a tonne, depending on who you are as selling it and what the added advantage you can give. So somewhere, like Matthew was saying, with the water benefits, might demand a little bit more of a price. If you put the slide on one, Matthew. Okay, so you can't see quite everything that I wanted to show you on this slide, but you can see that this is a potential income from a broadleaf woodland that's been grown for timber, so like the ones that Matthew was talking about. I've given you some different price points, and that's superb. And the potential income that you might be able to get over the various different time scales, so at 5 years, at 15 years, and you can see that as time goes by and as time goes on, the amount of carbon that's being sequestered into your woodland is getting greater, and actually the income that you're getting on each individual 10-year slot is getting more and more. I have to say that after about 35 years, the carbon sequestration in woodlands really ramps up till about 60, 70 years, where it starts to flatten off. But what you would be able to do if you were working under a Woodland Carbon Code project would be actually able to sell the rest of your carbon out into the private market. So look at that. For a 10-hectare woodland sequestering 16,000 tonnes of 600, look at my figures, 2,500 tonnes of CO2, you have an income of approximately £61,000 for growing the trees. Next slide, please, Matthew. I'm conscious I'm running out of time. But remember, please, that all of this and all of the work that we've been talking about today is governed by regulation. We have the Forestry Act to keep trees and woodlands where they are. because they are a scarce resource. If you need to or want to do work in the woodland, it's best to talk to your woodland officer or CSF officer, who will be able to advise you on what to do and what process there is to go through in order to start doing woodland management. You should be aware that new woodlands are governed by the environmental impact assessment. I hear people saying, well, how do we stop people from planting trees on valuable habitats? Well, the way we do that is by using the environmental impact assessment for forestry, and we screen out and we look for the things that might stop you from planting a woodland and the good things that are already on the land. And alongside both the Forestry Act and the EIA for forestry is the UK Forestry Standard, which helps us to show everybody what good practice is all about. That's the end of my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris and Matthew. So we've got a few minutes for you to ask some questions now via the chat. We've got a couple in already. So Matthew or Chris, if you burn wood in a power station, is there a carbon footprint? And similarly for wood chips, isn't this working against renewable ethics?
I'll take that first, Chris. The situation is what we would describe wood as a carbon lean fuel. So there is always an amount of carbon released in the harvesting and transport of whatever fuel you are using, things like oil, coal or wood. The greatest opportunity to reduce that is to use the wood as the fuel close to home. Now, if you are putting a fuel into a power station, the conversion of the energy in the fuel, whatever it is, to electricity, the most you're getting in the power station is about 35% coming out as electricity. What you've got with the power station at Kent Renewable Energy is they spent a long time looking for a site that could also use all the heat that comes out of the power station as well. So whereas the traditional coal-fired power stations are near where the coal is, and the heat energy is always going up the cooling towers, the heat energy is being used in district heating systems. So that's what's happening at that power station in Kent. It's what's happening at a medium-scale power combined heating power station at Heathrow. When you do wood for fuel to heat a property only, if you design the system well, you can get much, much higher efficiencies. And literally the conversion efficiency I'm getting off the boiler in the offices here is 87% of converting the energy in the fuel in terms to heat that we're using for the property. So it's not carbon neutral, but it is carbon lean, and it delivers a whole range of other benefits as well in managing the woodland, in business, etc. Anything you want to add, Chris?
Yeah, I just back that up with it. Yes, it's CO2 in, CO2 out, and it may not be quite exactly the same amount that is sequestered, that is given out, but it's viewed as near to carbon neutral as you can get. It's not necessarily working against renewable ethics. It is. But it is it isn't necessarily sort of against or for it, but it is, as Matthew says, the lowest and leanest one of the options that you can use.
Thank you, Chris and Matthew. Just one more, I think it's a comment rather than a question, maybe just to check. The minimum block size for countryside stewardship scheme, woodland creation, I presume this is 0.5 hectares or 0.1 hectares if you're using it for water quality.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, sorry, I'm just checking for more slides. For woodland planting, do farmers always contact the Forestry Commission, or can they include 100 plus trees in a standard countryside stewardship application?
Normally, all grants for woodland creation come directly to the Forestry Commission. There are some elements which are dealt with as part of other elements on the farm, where they're not specifically woodland. But most of it's come to us because if anything is woodland, then it has to go through the Forestry Commission regulatory duties. Now, they're not there to stop woodland planting, but they're just there to ensure that the woodland and the trees, when they're large and are a woodland, are in the right place.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there are tree planting options in higher tier stewardship, and they're going to be in mid-tier stewardship, but that's for specific schemes that you have to have Natural England advisor approval for, or CSFO approval for. I'll mention that at the end. Okay, we'll move on now to...
Can I just ask a question?
Hello? Yes, one quick question.
Yeah, those new trees that you're planting, where do they come from, and are they any danger to the native trees of this country?
You want me to take that, Chris?
Yes, I will. The new trees, so the exotic trees that I was talking about are called Paulownia. Then they have to be imported under license, and at the moment they aren't being planted in any great quantity. We are still checking that those trees are not, or the variant that's been requested to be planted is not invasive, and that actually it doesn't have any forms of new disease that we might want to look at. But we are about to launch a new scheme called Plant Health, which is from which any nursery that has a plant health design guarantees that its trees are, as it says, healthy when they leave the nursery. They have no infections and they carry no pests. But they're mostly, those Paulownia trees will mostly be coming, if they come, will be mostly coming from Germany. They aren't, as we say, we are wanting them to prove that it is a sterile version of the tree.
Thank you, Chris and Matthew. Really great examples there, and lots of information on grants, etc. You will be having a pack sent round, so you'll be able to see the figures in a bit more detail. There are more questions, but I'm going to move on now to Jeff Newman from Catchment Sensitive Farming, who's going to talk about some examples of farming with trees. Over to you, Jeff, and you've got the controls now.
Thank you, Philippa. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you, a slight change of tack. I'd like to talk to you about traditional orchards. Firstly, I've worked in Herefordshire for over 15 years looking at traditional orchards. I've also planted my own traditional orchard in the last 11 years. So it would be from personal experience and looking at a bit of history about silvopasture. So traditional orchards are known as a silvopasture system, and a silvopasture system is the practice of integrating trees, forage, and the grazing of livestock in a mutually beneficial way. So traditional orchards fit this definition well. They're open-grown fruit trees with grazed grassland and generally low-intensity management. Herefordshire Orchard Landscape, well, it's an established system of silvopasture. There was a survey done by the People's Trust for Endangered Species in 2008, where they found a whopping 3,360 traditional orchards in Herefordshire, covering 2,481 hectares. So that's quite a good proportion of the county. So you might ask, why so many orchards? Well, I just want to talk you through a key element of any system that you're putting in place, and that's design. The Agroforestry Handbook, which was launched in autumn 2019, summarised how you should design your silvopasture system, and I have summarised it further and reduced it down to a purpose, advice, layout, and measures of success. Bear with me. I know that's a palm tree on the right-hand side, but just think of palm and think of this key element of design, and I'll talk you through silvopasture. So orchard design in the sort of 1930s and 1950s, if we use the palm scenario, then we're looking at why did they want to plant more trees in Herefordshire? Well, the simple fact was that Bulmers were expanding and they needed more cider. So in terms of promoting that, they wanted to provide advice to farmers. They wanted to build capacity for growing fruit trees within the landscape. So Bulmers set up an orcharding department that was going to work in partnership with farms. They had a tree nursery. They've got farm advisors and advisory notes. In terms of the layout, it was basically open space trees with pasture, a mixed farming landscape in Herefordshire, and Herefordshire beef obviously is well known across the world. And then the measures of success, well, they were about cider production increase for Bulmers, but also providing a second income stream for farmers. I should say that orchards were nothing new under the sun in Herefordshire, but it was just this re-impetus of growth that they needed to produce more cider. So if you're looking at the layout for any silvopasture system, the first thing I'd say is right tree, right place, right reason. So location is all important. We've talked about the Forestry Act and also UK Forestry Standard and where you shouldn't plant trees. I think if you've got wet areas, fruit trees don't like their feet wet, so that's an obvious sort of don't plant. The next important thing is what rootstock or variety you're going to plant, and that really is determined by the animal that you've got there, so the livestock. You really want to keep most of that tree away from that animal to stop it grazing and pulling that down. And the next thing that's really important is the layout. Obviously, you want to get in and you want to harvest the fruit. You also want to get in and manage the grassland, and you want to maximise the productivity of the grass and also of the fruit trees. So talking from my own personal experience, you'll notice the palm tree again. I really wanted to make perry, and I was really interested in wildlife, so that's the purpose for my planting. I also advised a lot of farmers, so I thought, well, there's actually only one way to really do that properly, and that's to try it yourself, so that was an incentive for me to plant. I definitely went into partnership, so I did seek advice and support. Firstly, my brother farms the land, so I had to get his permission and actually, his buy-in to that. I'm a member of the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association, so local perry makers. I was involved with them, and also Natural England because we had a higher level scheme. So it was trying to make the higher level scheme more attractive to Natural England, and so planting an orchard was possible, and we got grant aid for that as well. The layout, well, I wanted something simple. Do it yourself. As far as I'm concerned, I was going to be doing it, so I needed it to be easy, and I was looking for the best craft varieties around. So I looked around, asked questions, and worked out which varieties I wanted. And measures of success, well, I wanted a premium market for the perry. Wildlife was a really important one for me, and actually keeping the farmer happy. I didn't want to intrude really on the farming system. I wanted to keep that to a minimum, so hopefully I've achieved that. So when I say planting and planning was all do it yourself, I used one of these advisory sheets that Bulmers produce for doing a triangular plant. I got myself a compass, some electric fence posts, and started walking up and down the field with electric wire, and my neighbours wondered what on earth I was doing. But it's a really effective system, actually, of doing a triangular plant, and you can do a triangular plant really simply using this. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. And actually what was really good is it's 15% more efficient to have a triangular plant than having a standard grid plant. You'll notice I've done different spacings. That's to do with canopy spread. So if we're talking about canopy spread and tree form, it's important that you understand your tree form, whatever silvopasture system you're doing, you really need to understand that. On the left, there's a pear called thorn, and that's a very upright growing variety, and is a really neat tree. On the right is Kingston Back. It's a legendary cider apple, but actually it's a very spreading tree, and actually it does take up a lot of space in the orchard. So it's worth carefully thinking about the tree form of whatever you're planting. So I talked about a very simple system. I want to talk about a complex system now. So if you're looking at complex planting, there's a lot you can do with the phased removal of trees. So this is an example from the Long Ashton Research Centre. And what they did was they looked at large trees, medium-sized trees and small trees, and looked at a planting plan that could accommodate those. And the key to it was that the tree C, so that's the small tree you see on the screen, that produces fruit a lot earlier than tree A and a little bit earlier than tree B. Tree A and B will grow to be big trees and they will produce a good crop in time, but initially they won't. So actually what you've got with this phased cropping and phased removal is that initially you can get some cropping off tree C, but as you move through the system, you'll get rid of tree C and you'll have trees A and B left, but you will have a good silvopasture system that will provide grass and also provide an early fruiting system. So I think this has lots of lessons actually for timber as well. I'll let the foresters explain how you might do that, but I think there's some really good sort of phase systems like this, and it's generally called adaptive management. So bear that in mind as you move through the age of any planting system or scheme you do. Protection and pruning are crucial. If you're putting trees with livestock, you really need to protect them. Chris Fairs, who was the farm advisor, said to me he didn't reckon a high percentage of standard trees would reach full maturity. He had a training event, and I think it was for slightly, but he basically saying that guards will see trees, and also you need to prune them, and certainly high stem pruning I think is important in a lot of silvopasture systems. Get the tree out of the reach of the stock, and then you're not going to get problems. It's not the only way of doing it, but I think it's a good way of doing it. So I could talk to you about tree guards all day. I'm not going to talk to you about tree guards all day. I just want to say the correct guard for the correct tree. So if you've got a big tree, you can afford to have a smaller guard. If you've got a small tree, you definitely need a big guard. But what you do need is you need the guard to be robust. You need it to be fit for the stock, so it protects from the stock, and also fit for the tree. And part fit for the tree, it needs to be accessible. You need to be getting in there. You need to manage that to a high stem, so you need to prune that tree up. Also manage the grassland underneath, because in the early years that will be competitive to the tree, depending on what size tree you plant. And obviously, if you're harvesting the fruit, you want to get in there. This is an example of one of my guards. They're steel well-matched guards, and you can see that not everything is perfect, but I think you'll agree that actually, as long as you're planning that, that's okay. And actually, the trees turned out okay. If that was timber, it might be, it didn't matter, but for the fruit tree, that's fine, and that tree is actually now successfully going on. But just, keep an eye on whatever system you're doing, you do need to maintain and look after. So I want to talk about measures of success as well. So back in 2012 now, we did a study in Herefordshire looking at the economic, social and environmental value of orchards. And we looked at all the different values, and it was really interesting. And can you really get £20 notes out of trees? Well, no, you can't. But I'm going to talk through the sort of different aspects of values that you can get from an orchard, and that can apply to silvopasture systems across the board. So I had a lovely old boy in Herefordshire who had a beautiful orchard, but he always said to me, every livestock farm should have an orchard. He wasn't talking about his orchard, he was talking about his livestock. He was well respected in the market for producing good livestock. And I was really pleased when I went to Groundswell conference about 18 months ago now. And I went to a little talk they did with the Organic Research Centre on the protection of livestock. And it was really interesting to see that they had actually put values on the shade and shelter that trees within pasture can provide. Young stock, for example, can have these natural lambing sheds, as they're called. And there's also tree fodder. There's a whole range of information on the value of tree fodder. So you could put your prunings down into the stock as well to help. One study that really caught my eye was this drier for longer under trees. So the grazing extended by 17 weeks. So it's looking at a 40% cut off removing stock of moisture content, and looking at that figure, they reckoned that you could get 17 weeks longer grazing period, which I think is really important actually for farmers and for farming, because if you can reduce your winter housing time or reduce any time when you have to take the stock in and expand those areas where you can keep them out, then that's got to be a money-saving option. Soil and water management, we've talked about slow the foe, natural flood management. Just to say that trees in grassland, they increase water infiltration. Pont-Bren is a study that's often quoted, and it's in the Agroforestry Handbook, where they just say that 2-year-old blackthorn can increase infiltration by 60 times. So you can imagine in an orchard you should get greater infiltration, and hopefully that will have benefits to the soil and to the water and the water quality. So we're talking about orchards. Why wouldn't we talk about fruitfulness? Of course we will. So this is a rather depressing picture to show, but it's a bush orchard, a commercial orchard in Hampshire that grubbed up last year. Almost not paying to grub up orchards, and actually that's because the main market was oversupplied and the side of demand perhaps peaked, and because of that, the value in the fruit dropped. And so you do need to be aware of where your market will be and plan that through. So I would suggest that specialist markets are the way forward if you're doing some sort of silvopasture system and getting a partnership. If you're looking at a traditional orchard, it's going to be 5 to 10 years before it fruits decently. You can do phased removal, and I've explained about that. But standard orchards always produce less than a commercial bush orchard, but they still can produce a decent amount. So what it comes down to is that you want a premium for that fruit price. And so going through partnerships, you can really achieve a much better price, double the price than you can in the main market. So it's worth looking at that. The other option, of course, is do it yourself and make your own cider. Well, I have gone down that route a little bit, but I do have figures on that if anyone's interested in sort of how you might be able to look at that for yourself. Wildlife value, well, I'm going to talk about wildlife value. I work for Natural England. I love orchards. I think they're great places for wildlife. They have a great habitat mosaic, varied structure, and they are greater than the sum of their parts. Back in the noughties, I was involved in a group where we were looking at marking orchards as a priority habitat. And when we looked at that, there were a lot of scholars that were a bit cynical about this man-made habitat, and was it really very valuable? But actually, we did a number of surveys, and they started revealing this beetle. This is a noble Defra beetle on the right here. That's quite significant, but it's actually quite an iridescent little beetle. But what it showed was that these traditional orchards were providing a really important invertebrate habitat. I've just summarised it by saying deadwood in healthy trees. It's a bit of a contradiction, but actually the way a fruit tree hollows out early in its life provides this habitat for invertebrates and for fungi and for many myriad species is really interesting. So they are really valuable for wildlife, and they do provide that habitat, significant habitat from 40 years old, from as little as 40 years old to 300 years. And it's actually, really good to see that, and the longevity of that is if you've got peri-pear orchards, peri-pears can last for 300 years. So public money for public goods, well, of course, you'd hope to be paid for that value, and countryside stewardship does pay for that. I won't go through the figures, and environmental land management should also pay for that, I might add. So there will be a way of getting some extra money on top of just the value of your fruit and the fact that it's a dual cropping system. The other thing that's there is carbon accounting, obviously, and if you want us to be carbon neutral, and so as a result, I think farming, you will be starting to look at how you can carbon account for the trees on your farm. One estimate is traditional orchards will sequester about 7.4 tonnes a year in their growing period. It depends on what time of the growth of orchard, but I know my traditional peri-pears are really putting on some biomass at the moment. Also, they provide an awful lot of carbon in the soil, so that's very important. There is no carbon code for silvopasture. Chris might talk you through that, but there isn't one at the moment, but hopefully that there will be sort of moves to sort of try and work out a bit more on that. I want to finish off by talking about cricket willow. So it's a slight move away from orchards. I want to thank Tim Smith, who's a farmer over in Worcestershire, and he's got a really neat setup. So he's been planting cricket willow for sort of 15 years or so now. And you'll notice the palm tree again in the corner, and I just want to talk through the purpose, the advice, the layout, and the measures of success. So this was a corner of his farm that was wet, mainly an arable enterprise in partnership with some livestock, and it was unproductive wet ground, and it wasn't suitable for arable. So he thought, well, how can I make better use of this? So he thought if he can put the cricket-back willow in, he can get the trees, he can get some grazing underneath it, and or hay. So there are three uses for that land. The advice, well, it wasn't off his own bat always, but it might have been. Excuse the pun. But he's now in partnerships with FC and the cricket-back manufacturer, and he's going to look and plant and harvest under contract. And you might say, well, what's the advantage of that? Well, the advantages are that he gets price estimates from the cricket-back manufacturer. He gets advice on management. So that little word adaptive management's coming again. If you don't manage cricket-back willow, you end up with a rubbish product. If you manage cricket-back willow by taking the buds off and you manage the squirrels, then you get a really good product at the end of the day. So it is quite a lot of management, but actually it does produce a brilliant product at the end of the day. The layout, he's done 100 trees per hectare on a grid system. It'd be interesting to see whether you could do it on a triangular plant and get slightly more trees. I'm not sure on that. But that's the basics of it. But this is where it really hits home. So the measures of success. Within 15 to 20 years, you get your product, and if you can get the premium buttwood price of £300 per tree, that suddenly becomes sort of like £30,000 a hectare over a period of 15 to 20 years. That's a really good return in forestry terms, and so that is really good. And I think I would just say that's amazing. And also he's using a soil conditioner. So he's composting. So you'll notice half of those trees aren't used. So he is actually composting the tops of those trees and making a soil conditioner, which goes back into his arable land and really helps with his carbon accounting. So it helps with his soils. So getting the carbon into the soils. I mean, it really is innovative. It's great. I really love the system, and I can't say enough about it, really. So that's really the sort of main topics I want to talk about, but I just want to summarise and say silvopasture is an established system. Don't reinvent, but be innovative. And you can have, don't forget your palm trees with purpose, advice, layout, and measures of success. And look at your farm business. Look at what it's going to provide. You can have income from obviously the wood or from the fruit, but you've got your livestock productivity and your carbon accounting, and then the public goods that hopefully will be paid for are the soil and water, the wildlife, and the carbon. So you can really sort of start to see things stack up under that economy, and also always use partnerships. Specialist knowledge is out there, and use it where you can. Really, really important and interesting, I think. So. Hopefully that's a bit of a rattle through, I'm afraid, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of how silvopastures might be able to be used in your farming systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That's a really good run through and great examples there of what you've done yourself and the cricket-back willow farmer. So there's a few questions coming for Jeff specifically, and there's lots of questions in the chat, but I'll pick out a few specifically for you, Jeff, and then we'll try and answer some of the others. So first of all, Jeff, can you claim on an existing orchard?
You can. There's a bit of a gap, so you should be able to get a countryside stewardship grant for maintaining an existing orchard, and I think they want it to be from 25 years old. I haven't looked at the grant scheme lately. I think it's about 25 years old onwards for an established orchard. So that you can get it for creating, but also for maintaining your traditional orchard.
Thank you. And then if an orchard is over 25 years old, that's a question mark, it can be registered as a traditional orchard and your BPS or mid-tier payments will improve. Is that correct? Your
BPS, they're not affected. You have to get into a scheme to get the extra additional payments through countryside stewardship. Under mid-tier, you can have a maintenance grant for traditional orchards. Again, it's that cut-off point of how old is it, and I think it's about 30 30 years or 25 years old. So yeah, you just have to check on the guidance on that. But it's sort of from that time period onwards, and it must have, I think, a third of the stations present as well, at least, and you will be expected to restock as well as part of that agreement generally.
Thank you. Another question, is there funding for orchard planting, and is this only through higher tier CS?
At the moment under creation it is. I've been arguing actually with our specialists recently, and we are going to get fruit tree planting under mid-tier. So that is that's hot off the press actually. That's hopefully going to move forward. It won't be for a few years, but we're hoping that then that will get integrated into ELM, environmental land management. So there's a bit of mismatch. There are other funds available for planting trees, and if you look around, there are different sort of local grants as well.
Okay, thank you. There's a comment on the insect. It looks like an emerald ash borer, apparently. I don't know if you checked it out.
It is a noble chafer beetle. That we had a natural England specialist out, and that definitely is a noble chafer beetle. Yeah, and you can tell by the poo. It's very distinctive poo. So. Which is the frass in the woods, but you don't want to know about that.
Okay, thank you. So there's a few questions here which might be for Chris and Matthew, perhaps. So I have a question. I currently have an ancient woodland, 15 hectares, that's not entered into any scheme. Are there any grants, or can I sell carbon credits from it? Or is it more economical to sell the entire woodland and start a new plantation?
Okay, I'll take that one. If it's an existing woodland, you can't claim for sequestering carbon because the woodland is already sequestering carbon. So much of the carbon in that woodland is in the soil and in the branches and not in the trees. So you can't claim for sequestering carbon in existing woodland, but there are good grants under countryside stewardship, as someone else said in the chat, for looking after your existing woodland. So what I would encourage you to do is give your local woodland officer a call and get him to come and see you and talk to about producing a management plan for the wood and seeing what the best options are for that woodland for you.
Thank you, Matthew. I've got quite a lot of comments about Paulonia. I've got one or two.
I've answered a few of them.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I've seen you've been answering them. So the question about introducing possibility of introducing invasive fungi in the soil with Paulonia, is that something that's been looked at?
I would say that's part of the biosecurity measures on anything that comes into the country, because a lot of the material you will buy in the supermarket comes in as growing material, comes in from abroad as well. So the biosecurity is a very, very critical thing, and it's included within all the normal checks. So what we've seen for the very small numbers that have considered Paulonia is that the planting material that it's grown in is sterile as well. So it's important to have good biosecurity whatever you're doing, and even moving between sites and woodlands, cleaning boots, cleaning machinery, because we've seen that contributing to moving disease around in various ways as well. So biosecurity, very, very true, cannot be underplayed. We're on that.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to comment on the health check by Defra and APHA in respect to Paulonia? Chris?
The plant healthy scheme, I as I said in the chat, I was using the royal we, being part of the Defra family. It is a Defra scheme, plant healthy. So I was as I say, using the royal we. Forestry Commission is part of Defra, and therefore when I say we are launching it, Defra is launching it.
Yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, Chris, AFA checked all the plantable material coming into the country, both trees and other things. we have a very strong operation that checks all timber and material coming into the country as well. So there's a lot of things we can say about biosecurity. We could go on all night about that and the various diseases that are around, but we haven't got time to do that at this occasion. If people want one, we can do something similar on the biosecurity anyway.
Okay, thank you. Let's pick something different then. So is the biodiversity value of the tree species considered at all in the woodland carbon guarantee?
Yes.
Within the Woodland Carbon Code, you have to create your woodland according to the UK Forestry Standard, and the UK Forestry Standard will consider that, and also under the EIA regulations, we will consider that question in whether it's appropriate to plant the trees that you're planting in the area you're planting them.
One of the things that's worth adding to Chris's point is that although the government scheme will guarantee you a price for the carbon that your woodland sequesters, you are not obliged to sell that carbon to the government. If, for instance, there is a large business or large company that wants to offset their carbon emissions, they might be interested to buy the carbon from you. And if you deliver carbon with a whole load of extra benefits, such as the environmental benefits, they might be very predisposed to support that. So the key thing is the government is underpinning the carbon market, but if there is a stronger market out there, you can go to that one. The government just guarantees the minimum price you would get.
Okay, thank you, Matthew and Chris and Jeff. There's loads of questions, and I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but what we'll do is we'll capture them all and ask our speakers to answer them, and we'll send out a Q&A with the presentation afterwards. So thank you very much for those questions that have come through. There's loads of interest, basically. So something else I just wanted to cover was we've made some changes in countryside stewardship for this year to allow trees to be planted for the objective of improving air quality. Really, this is focused on reducing ammonia emissions. So that's a new objective for countryside stewardship, similar to the water quality objective, and it will allow the woodland creation scheme to be used for planting tree shelter belts with the smaller minimum areas that are needed for water quality will apply for air quality as well. And also you'll be able to plant trees through mid-tier and higher tier using the particular tree planting items. But you will need to work with your Catchment Sensitive Farming officer, get some advice on that. We offer some advice visits to farmers in priority areres that we're working in for woodlands, for water and air, which will look at how to plant trees for water quality and air quality. So one to be aware of. And that will be available for the next few years while CS is still around. So that concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to thank you very much for participating, bearing with us with a few glitches, and thank you very much to our presenters for their really interesting talks. We're going to send you a copy of the leaflet we've produced, which illustrates some of the benefits of trees for a farm business. And we'd also really like to hear from you about what you thought of the webinar, and some feedback if you think we can improve it. We're recording it and we'll be posting it out on YouTube. So if you can look out for that, we'll send that for you. If you look on the chat, there's a link to the survey from Jamie Smith. It's got a survey at the end. If you can click on that and send us your feedback back, that would be fantastic. We'd be keen to run some more webinars if you think it's helpful, and also really keen to hear from you if you want some further advice from CSF. If you go to our website, you can see our Catchment Sensitive Farming officers. We are covering priority areas, so we're not everywhere, but we may be able to help you. So please contact us if you want some more advice on this, or improving water quality, air quality, or natural flood management. And your woodland officers are also there to help and support with the grant schemes as well. So that's their link there. So I'm going to wrap up now, and again, thank Jeff, Matthew, and Chris for a really interesting hour and a bit, and to Jamie for hosting the webinar today. And I look forward to getting everybody's feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.